Welcome back to the lab, dear viewer. Have you made yourself comfortable? Perhaps you should go and get yourself a snack, unless you have one already. Now that you're ready to go with your corn chip fare of choice, let's talk cannibalism. In the infamous words of a certain devil barber on Fleet Street, cannibalism is a circumstance in which you'll see man devouring man, my dear. It's often thought of as one of humanity's greatest taboos, which is understandable and all. You'd probably stop showing up to your friend Jimmy's house for poker night if you had found out that he was a connoisseur of human flesh, unless of course you were also into that. And there's even auto-cannibalism, which a good percentage of you may be participating in right now. Eating your own hair, nails, scabs, skin, and etc. are all common examples of auto-cannibalism.
Welcome to the family, son.
Cannibalism, of course, isn't a human invention either, as many species of animals practice cannibalism on a regular basis. They even represent other lesser-known forms of cannibalism, including sexual cannibalism, which spiders and mantises commonly practice, filial cannibalism, and intertrauchine cannibalism. With that being said, some would say that cannibalism is a pretty simple affair for humans. You just grab a man and eat him. But I'm here to tell you that it gets a bit more complicated than a simple Serengeti dine and dash. Let's start with some history on the subject. Cannibalism, also called anthropophagy, the eating of human flesh by humans, is a term derived from the Spanish name caraboles or canibales for the Carib, a West Indies tribe well known for their practice of cannibalism. Since it was a widespread custom going back into the early annals of human history, examples of gnawing upon man flesh have been found among peoples on most continents. The first known cannibal was a Neanderthal, who we'll be calling George in this example. George's victims, 100,000-year-old bones, were discovered in Moilagerse, a cave in France. The 6 sets of remains show evidence of George's successful attempts to reach brains and marrow, as well as tool marks that indicate where flesh from the tongue and thighs were removed for food. While some may have trouble telling the difference between cannibalism and a naturally violent unaliving at a glance, marks from precision cutting are very different from those caused by simple barbarism. Some other ways archaeologists found signs of cannibalism were by finding bones that had been pounded or cut open, finding bones that were scattered randomly as opposed to a full skeleton, or by finding human bone samples in petrified human poo. In some regions, human flesh was looked upon as a form of food, sometimes equated with animal food, as is indicated by the Melanesian pigden term, long pig. Victorious Maoris often cut up the bodies of the dead after a battle and feasted on the flesh. And the Batak of Sumatra were reported to have sold human flesh in the markets before they came under full control by the Dutch. In other cases, the consumption of particular portions or organs was a ritual means by which certain qualities of the person being eaten might be obtained, or by which powers of witchcraft and sorcery might be employed. Ritual unalivings and cannibalism in Africa were often related to sorcery. They thought of it as a power-up, but instead of eating a power pill or a mushroom, it was a human head. In other more developed areas, ritual cannibalism occurred as part of the drama of secret societies. Nothing says high-class conspiracy like human sirloin steak with a nice glass of Chianti and some fava beans. In some cases, the body of a dead person was ritually eaten by their relatives, which is termed as endo-cannibalism. Some Aboriginal Australians perform such practices as acts of respect. Dining upon your fellow man may not sound like the most appetizing thing to do, but sometimes circumstances take away all other options. And so it was for the Donner Party. The Donner Party was a group of American pioneers that set out to California from the Midwest in 1846, and didn't have the best luck in doing so. In fact, that's an understatement. They were misled by shady trailblazers and went through hazardous terrain as a result. They had their cattle stolen by Native Americans, and they even had to banish a party member named Reed for unaliving another member over the treatment of their remaining bovines. They made it as far as the mountains of Sierra Nevada before they found themselves in an early snowstorm. Some set out on foot to help, but some never returned. Then the inevitable food shortage kicked in and forced the last of the party to do the unthinkable by consuming those that had already given in to the cold. 3 rescue attempts were made, and after all was said and done, 48 out of the 87 original party members survived. If you're ever having a bad time in a road trip, think of the misbegotten journey of the Donner Party. Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, dear viewer, but in our civil society, quote-unquote, anthropophagy is still very common. In fact, if you listen very carefully, you can still hear the sounds of tearing skin, the chewing of raw flesh, and teeth gnawing on freshly stripped bone. Now that you have that imagery in your head, know that cannibalism in modern society can happen anywhere and at any time. After a Tinder date you thought was going well, on your way back home from work perhaps, or even during your weekly D&D sessions. I would make sure to bring the snacks if I were you. A modern example of cannibalism could be found in the freezer of famous serial unaliver Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm going to warn you, if you don't have a fortitude of steel, I would go find a puppy video or something. Now then, after luring a grim total of 17 victims to his home, or his grandmother's basement, for extracurricular activities, Jeffrey would expertly butcher each unfortunate soul and save parts for later consumption in his fridge. These included the livers, hearts, biceps, and thighs of many of his victims. He even added a gourmet flair by tenderizing the flesh and cooking them into his daily meals. I wonder if he ever made human hoagies. Now, I know what you're thinking. Eating people sounds like a low-risk investment of time that I should definitely work into my schedule. First, I applaud your lack of moral scruples. Secondly, stay away from my femurs. Thirdly, it would be most unwise to consume the brain. And here's why. 3 words: transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, or TSEs. TSEs are rare degenerative brain disorders or prion diseases. And don't even get me started on how fatal prion diseases can be. And for those of you that don't know, prions are proteins in the brain that somehow got folded the wrong way during development. They also have a rather nasty habit of misfolding other existing proteins in your brain and binding them together into a misshapen amalgamate. In human brains, these masses of prions cause neurological disorders and sometimes lead to a swift exit from the mortal coil. One popular example of the disease, simply named Kuru, is very rare and most associated with the practice of eating the brains of those that no longer lived in New Guinea that ended in 1960. However, even though the practice of extreme zombie role rehearsals had ended, Kuru had a long incubation time. Some members who had participated in the brain feasts didn't show any symptoms for the disease for years. When they did appear, these symptoms included arm and leg pain, difficulty walking, headaches, swallowing difficulty, and tremors and muscle jerks. And the best/worst part of this disease is that it still has no known cure. Yes, let that sink in, and then ask yourself if that gray matter gyro was worth the slow starvation. Now, wasn't that a fun topic, everyone? I certainly hope that I didn't ruin anyone's appetite. Oh, it sounds like that time. I'll see you in the next episode, dear viewer. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to give the subjects a bite to eat. Thank you all so much for joining another episode of In the Lab. And if you've made it this far, you should definitely subscribe. And if you'd like to support the show and its further endeavors, as well as receive exclusive access to content, including a spot in the Discord server, feel free to join our Patreon. See you next time. Pull the lever.